My name is Carl Quo, and this is Founder Quest, a podcast about the journeys of starting a game studio. Ran Mo, founder of Proxima in 2021, didn't always work in games. He initially spent time as more of a consultant in corporate strategy side of things before transitioning into product management at Electronic Arts. That said, entrepreneurship and games was always the goal, and so he spent time learning what he felt he needed to before making the jump. And despite that jump being very, very hard, Proxima has been successful, releasing Suck Up, one of the first embodied AI games earlier this year, to strong success, and now is building off of that. Ran's journey has definitely had some wild turns, and it was wonderful to listen to. Let's jump in. All right, so what I always like to start with is the question of, you got to a point where you're like, I'm going to found a company. And that company became Proxima. But there was that moment where you were like, hey, I think entrepreneurship is my thing. I want to start a company. Let's go. Tell me what led up to that moment and what pushed you over the edge.
Yeah, for sure. I think it starts actually a lot earlier than Proxima. For me growing up, I've loved video games. I loved films. I loved storytelling. And I thought I wanted to build a career around some intersection of this. And I want to be able to contribute to those stories. I want to contribute to those experiences. And so the way that I approached my career was over time learning the ropes of what it took to create those stories across different mediums, and then taking steps to say, what can I build myself? From my career perspective, I started my career in consulting. And after consulting, I went to work for YouTube in their corporate strategy team. So at the time, we were thinking about how do we do premium subscriptions? How do we make own content for YouTube, maybe VR? And that was actually the first journey into my entrepreneurship. When I was at YouTube, I started a side business, and it was called Vivid. And what it did was I went to all these VR filmmakers. This is 2015, 2016. So it was very early before the Oculus came out. A lot of really beautiful VR films that were being made, but nobody was seeing it because no one had a device. So I was like, okay, well, you know what? These are really cool. I want to exhibit this to a broader world. So on the side, I created a VR cinema, and this was in Toronto. I'm Canadian. So we rented a place, a gallery space. We converted into a VR cinema. It was the first one in North America. I think there was one in Amsterdam before, but basically essentially the second one in the world. And I licensed these really beautiful films that were exhibited at Tribeca, that was exhibited at Cannes and a whole bunch of places, and packaged them in a way that we show these 40-minute experiences for audience who've never seen VR experiences. And it was really magical. We had tens of thousands of audience come through. We partnered with the Toronto International Film Festival, which is a huge festival to put on events. And we did a lot of things that were really the first time we're starting. And apologies for YouTube because I was not working very hard at the time. I was working for the 8 hours and then 8 hours building my own business, flying back and forth to Toronto. And there was a few lessons I learned. One is, how do I think about building a really great team together? And the second is, where do I want to build in terms of entertainment? Building a movie theater in some way was great, but it wasn't my story to tell. I was finding other people's stories and packaging them and all that. I really wanted to say, how do I create those experiences? How do I be part of in the center of that journey? And to do that, there were things that I needed to learn. So after that experience, I went to business school, and after business school, I went to work for Electronic Arts, where I did a lot of work for The Sims, for mobile games, for an upcoming game called Skate. And essentially learn the ropes at the highest level of what it takes to build a game inside of a game studio. And that was the moment in which I said, I have some experience in entrepreneurship. I really want to build something of my own. I think this is a time. I have enough requisite skills. I'll never have enough to say, I'm going to take the leap and see what I can do. And that was the genesis of Proxima. And that was the end of 2021.
Awesome. I think, I have a similar sort of, not exactly path, but that mindset of, I think I want to get to this place eventually. And so let me take jobs and opportunistically see, okay, what can I learn from this job to propel me to this goal?
Yeah.
And so I definitely resonate with that path and how you were very intentional about what you took on and did that kind of stuff. Now, the question I sort of want to follow up with is, okay, you make the choice to start Proxima. You think you've gained a bunch of skill sets enough to take that leap. Immediately after taking that leap, what were you like, oh no, I need to learn all these things now too, and sort of had to like go on a learning journey as you started up Proxima for real?
There were just so many things. I think no one person in a big studio can see everything. Everything from, if we're talking about the technical side of things, everything from concept art to thinking about riggings and animation and VFX and all the things that I would never have imagined were so difficult. There was one moment where I was like, okay, the animator's not doing it correctly. I'm going to do it. So I'm going to record myself doing a particular motion. And it's like, this is just hacking things together. But these are the micro things, and they're not, they're very, very important. But I think the biggest thing is, how do you create a team that is empowered, that is good, made of good people, and how do you set them in a direction that creates value for consumers, for players who we're trying to entertain, and then therefore by extension of that creates value for the business. And I'm still learning that, and nowhere perfect. And there's a lot of lessons, I think, even to this year, I'm trying to get better at. But those are the most important ones, I think, that I was somewhat equipped for, but really never equipped for until I get to those moments. So it's more, I think, both the technical stuff of everything that involved in making a game, and we use AI as well. So, building an AI-based game, what does that take? But also, more importantly, how do you build an organization that can get there?
To your point, I think, building a team and culture and behavior is a lifelong journey of learning. I think all of us are figuring it out as we go. But as you sort of, went down that path of like, okay, I need to figure out this sort of technical side, and I need to figure out this like building a team and like what it really means to bring it together, especially at, sort of both startup scale, which tends to be pretty small compared to something like Electronic Arts, but then also startup tempo, which is, I think, also a wild thing that people don't always recognize before they experience it. So was that a lot, like, did you seek out ways to specifically, like structured ways to learn that? Or was it more like trial by fire and I'm learning a lot of lessons as I'm making these decisions along the way?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think the challenge of building a startup as a founder is that sometimes the founder is unchecked, right? Like, when I was at EA or anywhere else, you would have people, general managers, executives, CEOs, which are incredibly capable and experienced. And we can say, hey, how do I learn from you? Not just in the technical skills, but in the behaviors and the strategy of doing these things. The challenge, yes, you can say, oh, I have a board, or I don't have a board, but the board is not going to see what you do day to day. And the hard part for a CEO, and what I realize, is there isn't an immediate feedback process. That's the hardest part. It's trial by fire, but it's only trial by fire if I'm willing to say, hey, did I do this right? And I think those are the moments of reflection to say, I made this choice, whether it's from an organizational perspective, from a strategy perspective, from whatever it may be. and then reflect on it. Did I do the best job that I could? And 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 I think sometimes I have to give myself grace, right? We survived for 2.5 years and made a game and became profitable in one of the most challenging times in the game industry. So it's clearly we're doing something right. But in other ways, there's a lot to learn. I think the reflection and giving myself the space for that reflection is the most important part.
Yeah, for sure. And I think the huge part about it is the pace and the challenges never stop, right? Like, Proxima has found good success already, and will hopefully continue to find more success, which means more scale, more growth, which, as soon as that happens, that's new challenges on all of these fronts that you have to learn new lessons and reflect about, right?
Yes.
So, as you reflect on the deciding, like, okay, I want to start a company, making, building your career, making the decision to start Proxima, and the lessons you sort of had to learn from that moment forward, I'd like to think that a large part of the audience of this podcast are folks who are thinking about or close to that moment for themselves, who are like, I think I want to start a game studio. Am I ready? Am I, should I make this leap? Should I not? What would be the sort of biggest learning from that sort of journey and decision to start Proxima immediately afterwards that you would try to pass along to someone who's at that moment?
Yeah. I think the the biggest learning that I have is that what it takes to succeed, in my opinion, is not how good of a designer you are, though that is very important. It's not how good of a business manager you are, though that is important. The biggest thing is how much resilience you have to be able to recognize that vision. And you and I talked separately, Carl, about the challenge that we all face in the industry today, and where we think about funding, where we think about the consumer preferences and all these things. And there's just a billions things that are punching a founder in the face all the time. And I think for someone to be ready, you have to be a romantic almost a little bit to say, I really have this beautiful vision that I want to see it through, whether it's a game, whether it's what a concept of a studio should be or a company. But also marry that against this idea that, hey, I can take a lot of things because a lot of things will be thrown at you. And in some ways, I heard this saying where it's actually better to not know what you get into because you don't know how painful it will be. Uh, that's what I would say. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's come up on the on interviews before, where people are basically like, we don't do this because it is easy, but because we thought it would be easy, right?
Yes.
That classic meme phrase. Let me switch topics a little bit. So I believe you have a co-founder in Proxima. Yes.
We do not. So I do
Okay.
not have a co-founder,
Okay.
not in the traditional sense,
Okay.
but in some senses I do. Let me explain. So
Sure.
when I started the business, we had it was me who left EA to build it, and I was lucky enough to um, get some funding from a great venture capital firm. They're not Linden Venture Partners, which I know they're investors in you as well, Carl. And they're really great folk, and they have a lot of relationship with Electronic Arts in particular, which is how I built that relationship. But very shortly after the first funding round, which is basically just a very, it's a pre-seed to get started, I brought on three amazing uh, people who over time became co-founders. And it was across all the functions that I think the key functions in which a game company or entertainment company needs, which is a product from my side, engineering, technical designs, and design. And of course, there's other disciplines that are incredibly important, like art. But as a founding team, that was what we started out. And for the first year or two, it was mostly the four of us at the core who built the business. Our first successful product was built by the four of us, um, and that's a journey that we've been on. So I've been very grateful to have that because it's hard enough as it is. So yes.
Yeah, for sure. So just to say it back to you, so I make sure I heard correctly.
Yeah.
You founded the business solo,
Yes.
and then you brought on an initial very small team, and then that you plus that team have functionally carried the business initially and became very close as and sort of it's a founding team in that sense.
It's a founding team. Yeah. I think what defines a co-founder is sometimes arbitrary to say, oh, we dreamed of this business together in the basement together and we decided to take the leap together, then that's a founding team. But to me, it's also about what are the biggest, baddest hurdles that at the very beginning when you're against the world, before the business has any steam, who are those people that were there? And that is the founding team. So in some senses, I started with one person. In some senses, I think we started with four.
I think it definitely is. It is a there are many definitions, and I've run into a bunch of founders who have many definitions of who is a co-founder of the business, who is part of the founding team, who, and what's the difference between that versus an initial employee.
Yes.
And what I tend to say is, to your point, it's about a bit of the mindset, right? Like, in your case, while you are probably, you were the only person on the incorporation documents or whatever, right? That it sounds like that initial founding team are really the folks who consider themselves to have the business on their shoulders, and you guys make decisions as a team
Yes.
towards carrying that business forward.
Yes.
So you mentioned that you sort of had this mix of the three others that joined you: engineering, design, and technical design. When you were sort of building that initial founding team, how did you think about what would be the right mix? Was it a case of like you were looking for those specific skill sets? Is it what you happened to find? Like, how did that team evolve in that specific mix?
It is exactly that. I think it's kind of like you need to build a tool to solve the job. If I were building a B2B SaaS business targeting towards the legal space, it would be a very different team. Engineering, sales, a lawyer that can understand the problems of that space. For gaming, the two core part of it is who can build it, which is engineering, which is art and technical design and all the things. And then what is it that we build, which is design. Um, and then what is and then the bigger question of what is the product that we should build, right? Do we build for mobile? Do we build for PC and Steam? Do we use particular technologies? Do we access particular languages? Product. So those are, I think, the building blocks to a successful team. If we had three business people and one engineer, or six engineers and no designer, or five designers and no engineer, it just won't work.
Yeah. How did you find your co-founders?
It was a mix of both. I think um, most of them I was a friend of a friend, so a secondary connection, and and then in one particular case, we worked at the same company before. It was actually not a gaming company, but we worked at the same company before. I didn't when I left. I didn't want to. I think EA was really good to me. I really loved my mentors at EA. I really respected everything they did. I didn't want to be the person to say, "Hey, now I'm gonna form a little thing and go off." I say, if I want to go build it, I'll. And by the way, the EA relationship is also what led me to, I think, partially get funding, um, to say that I'm not going to buy the hand that fed me.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there are different studios, especially large ones. Like, I know Microsoft is kind of used to that life cycle because they've been around long enough where founders spin out and like you have people who leave and that kind of stuff. But I think it's always good to not burn bridges in the game industry because it is tiny and you will run into those humans. And exactly to your point, right? Like, LVP is so intertwined from a history perspective with EA that if you have a good relationship with EA, you will likely be introduced to those folks. And so, but not biting the hand is a good call in general in the game industry, I think. So, you knew you started this company, you knew you wanted to find sort of this kind of set of skills. You got introduced to folks who are, secondary connections, folks that you worked with a long time ago. It sounds like. How did you like? In the case of an initial employee, right? Like you can sort of be like, okay, we just do the normal interview process and it's fine. But like founding team members, people who really will shape the business at that initial stand are like so important in many ways and in ways that are not traditional as part of like normal functional interviews. And so how did you decide like, okay, I found these humans and these humans are the right humans? Like how did you go on that journey and build that initial relationships with them?
Yeah, it's a really good question. Thanks for asking that, Carl. I think for me, what it took was I wanted to understand who they were as people. That was really important. And I knew that the journey was hard and it was circuitous. And I didn't want the people who said, this is exciting for the moment and it looks good on the resume to jump in, because those are people probably who are going to jump off the first moment that the company faces difficulty. And given that you only have a couple people, the business will be in trouble. We actually had an interview. So Nick was the first partner that I brought on board, and he leads our design. And when after Nick came on board, we were speaking with a really accomplished engineer, and this particular engineer had all the credentials, all the best gaming companies and non-gaming Silicon Valley companies you can think of. And was somewhat highly recommended. And we talked with him, and there was just a feeling of he's really great. I'm not sure if he's around when we get in trouble. And it's hard to describe, and who knows, right? Maybe he will be, but it's a gut feeling. And we have pressure, I think, not from OVP, but investors wanted to say, if we want to raise money, you want to put pretty pictures on the deck, right? To say, hey, this is the founding team and look how talented they are. And certainly he would have been a really stellar part of the deck, but it wasn't right. And so I was lucky to, both hopefully some discerning who I brought on, but also was lucky in the people that I did bring on from co-founding team, because then we did run into a lot of tough times as a business. And it was during those tough times, I think, that we really came together.
Speaking of tough times, how do you guys come together to make, sort of the critical decisions or deal with disagreements about things? Like, what is the mechanism that you and that sort of like founding team, as you guys are shouldering the giant decisions of a business, come to agreements, make decisions, and also deal with disagreements?
It's a really good question, and the frank answer is still a learning process, especially as the company grows bigger and roles evolve. At the very beginning, I think everybody was new, and so everybody was, including myself, new to the venture, and so I think we all defaulted to what was rational at the time. What was preached and rational at the time. And the time, this was again end of 2021. So the markets were really hot. The metaverse narrative was very strong. Funding was plentiful. And so what we were told was that we should go build the biggest possible, baddest game that we possibly could. And of course, we didn't have a lot of funding, but it didn't matter because we just needed to build a small slice of that pie. And sure enough, when we get there, given our credentials, given whatever, we can then raise the 5, 10, 15 million dollars in which we would then realize that vision. And in some ways, we didn't question it. Okay, yes, that sounds like the right decision. and but we were at the very last cohort. So there's a cohort of game companies who was funded, I would say, between 2018 to 2022, right? That were very well capitalized and funded by to tens of millions of dollars. We were not very well capitalized, but we were in that cohort. We were the last one of the last companies. So we were funded at the end of 2022. And let me get this right. End of 2021, actually, sorry. And in 2022, I remember this very distinctly, by April, the market had crashed. And the funding market just for gaming just totally dried up. But it wasn't immediately evident to us at that time, right? Because yes, it's hard, but things bounce back, right? And so we just kept building for some time, all the while looking up and saying, "Hey, is anyone going to give us the next tranche of funding to be able to realize a bigger vision?" And we built a bigger game, which we were quite proud of. And then we started seeing two things. One is the capital just continued to dry up. But there's a second phenomenon in which the earlier cohort in which we were part of, the companies who were funded in 2018, 2017, 2019, they had been funded for a while, and their games started to come out. And by and large, it was not successful. Not individually, but I think collectively. And so clearly there was something wrong with the strategy that was the industry norm at the time. But it took a little bit of time, and I wish we had realized it sooner. Is that we're going to disengage from that, and we're going to play a different game. No pun intended. But it wasn't until I think a little bit longer, I think a year down this journey, where we were building this meaningfully larger game. Maybe even a year to year and a year and a quarter, call it. And we were really, really working hard, and it was evident that there was just no money, and also that these evidence of this strategy not working was coming about, where there was a really tough moment for us to say, we can keep going. We actually launched the vertical slice to the market and had some good reactions, but again, it's very small. There was no way we can build this game with 4 or 5 of us. We didn't have the funding, we didn't have the resources, none of that. We can keep going, bang down every door to our publishers, investors, and whatever, and saying we need the funding. And then it's going to take us another 2-3 years to even finish this game, and who knows if it's going to work or not. Is that what we want to do? And the biggest decision we made was to say, we invested all this time, but it's sunk cost fallacy. We have to throw it all out. And so there was a moment when we said, we're going to throw out this game in all of its component forms. We're going to reset about what we can do as a small core team with the resources at our disposal, which was not plenty at the moment. And also with technologies that are changing entertainments. And so that was also when generative AI was starting to come up, and we say, can we build something with this? And with the knowledge that we had built before, with the way that we observe the market, we built a game that's called Suck Up, which is it's a comedy game that uses generative AI for the non-player characters. We built that game in less than 6 months, with a team of 4 people. And then that game, fortunately for us, did well, especially once the streamer community that opened the door. It was, I think, at least from my perspective, the first commercially successful game with AI that's in the market today. But that was the decision that we went through. That was a tough time, I think, for us.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad you mentioned that. I was gonna make sure to give you credit for being basically the first art. I think it's arguable whether you were the first Gen AI game in general, right? Like, I think there's arguments to be made that like AI Dungeon and stuff technically count, but
Yes.
like you were the first 3D game, and certainly the first commercially successful like game that got a bunch of traction and stuff, which is really amazing. And so, we talked about this separately earlier, but just for the pod, as we sort of shift into talking about fundraising. So you raised very early from LVP, and it sounds like you went on this journey where you sort of were playing by the 2021 rulebook for a bit, saw the market shifting, decided to pivot to play a scrappier playbook, release Suck Up. That did well. Take us through your sort of fundraising journey from there. Like, are you mostly just that initial seed and then the revenue from Suck Up, or how has that sort of transitioned as you've gone?
Yeah. So I think after we launched Chuck Up, I think there was a mentality shift for me, which is, maybe we don't need so much money to be able to build great experiences, and we should try to build more frugally. Um, but after Suck Up, we were fortunate that we had a few inbound offers, um, which is ironic because when we really didn't need the money, there was none to be had. But that's the reality of how the world works. And and so we took a little bit of money, but it wasn't something super substantial. And Suck Up made us some money as well. So we have I wouldn't say we have a large pot in the bank, but we have a, a pot that feels just right for us. And the bigger question is not so much, will I raise more funding? Um, because that's almost a secondary decision. I think the primary decision is, what do we do from here? What are the lessons that we can take away from building Suck Up and the other things we built before, as well as what we observe in the market today, and where do we make the next, the bigger bet for ourselves? I think there was a time when just the time when we were building Suck Up, I and I was questioning about whether this fundraising model was working or not. I dove into a lot of companies who are successful, the companies that became really successful in the last 10 years. So a few I looked at, one was for Supercell, one was a Brazilian company called Wildlife Studios, which became a couple $1 billion in market capitalization at one point. I looked at MiHoYo, which is the Chinese company behind Genshin Impact and so on. And what was very curious is for a company like MiHoYo, they only ever raised $100,000. Now, of course, if that was a different time because that's what mobile gaming was taking off, so revenue was much easier to be had. It was kind of grabbing dollars off the floor, so to speak, if you build a good game. But nonetheless, there was lessons there. And then there's two lessons. One is you should start small, and partially because it gives you a chance to hone your skills, hone mind skills, and to learn. And then, but then if you kept going small, you run the risk. I think we run the risk of becoming like a indie studio, right? We only build these games. So MiHoYo built the first game they built was super tiny. They were college students. Then the second game they built, they took 9 months to build. It was a side scroller zombie chibi game, and it did very well for what it was. But then they took that and they said, okay, we're based on the skills that we have, we're going to go bet on the next thing, which is just bigger in ambition. But it felt like the right size bet, and they took that bet, in which you had 3D combat and animations and open. I don't think I had open world, and then they bet on a narrative game, which was like a Phoenix, like a lawyer game, and then they built the narrative structure around understanding how to do that. They built a gacha game to understand how do we think about gacha in the context of RPG. And all of those lessons over years, you can say, I'm going to then take all that bet and the cash flows I created from those businesses, and I'm going to build something like Genshin Impact. And that's really powerful, right? Because you start small, but you don't stay small. And so that's kind of our philosophy, I think. And we're still trying to figure it out. But that's what we believe.
Yeah, I think there's a couple really powerful lessons there that I've talked with some other founders about, not really on the podcast, but separately in the community, which is there's this great scene from Silicon Valley that gets linked around occasionally where it's like, we could have taken less money. Like,
Yes.
holy shit, that would have changed everything, right? And I think that's a powerful lesson of it's not always about, you're not trying to get on the scoreboard of money. You're trying to understand, like, hey, how am I taking capital at the right times and at the right amount to achieve some broader vision? And I think having the discipline, somewhere between discipline and jadedness, with capital markets to engage in that, I think is really smart and thoughtful. And I think to your point, looking at that journey for a lot of companies is that sort of like, hey, how do you take smaller successes, use that as building blocks into larger successes, right? Which is, I think, a lot about as a founder as well, because like when you look at a bunch of successes of last year, this year, what is time? But like Power World, Lethal Company, Helldivers, Baldur's Gate 3, all of these are like things that are like, to your point, successes built on earlier lessons that are just rolled over until they snowball out, right? So I think that's a really thoughtful way to approach it. So let's shift a little bit to perhaps even more uncomfortably focus on you. What are your primary support structures for yourself as a founder?
This is a hard one. I'm I got married in May,
Mm-hmm.
and uh, the biggest supporter I'm so grateful to have is my wife. Um, when I started the business, um, I I'm a Canadian citizen. I was living in the United States to work for EA, and when I quit EA to build this business, I had no team, I had no funding, but also I had no visa to stay in this country. And my wife, who is American, she lives in the Bay Area, or her family's originally from the Bay Area. Um, she said, "Let's just do it. Let's go." And we packed our bags and we moved to Vancouver because I couldn't stay in the country. I needed to get a different visa. And we lived a nomadic life, mostly in Canada, for the better part of the year before the visa came through. So it was basically running a business, starting something from scratch, but also, bouncing around like a nomad. And I've always been so grateful for her because it was uprooting her life, not knowing what's going to happen in the future. We weren't married at the time. Um, that was number one, I think. And then by extension, having our families being supportive, I think is as well. And then the second I say is the four guys, the three guys and me. There's so many times in which I could have um, fallen by myself and with other team members probably would have fall down holes. Um, and whether it's funding decisions, whether it's strategy decisions, I think the biggest pivot that we made, which is throwing out everything we built for almost a year and a half, um, it just started out with conversations with the team, one-on-one conversations, and I didn't make the decision. It was about, hey, this is what I'm seeing. This is, I think, where we're going to end up. What do you think we should do? And having those not just conviction decisions, but also kind of being that support system of, hey, look, I think we can all figure it out. It really helps. And the last one, I think, to LVP's credit and to the investor base that I have, I think the investors were amazingly, I'm very amazingly grateful because we can say things like, oh, the funding dried up and there's nothing left. But it's hard across up and down the chain. Whatever struggles that we have in terms of accessing funding, it's not because they don't want to give it. It's because they also are in a different financial paradigm. The funds themselves and thinking about how the world changes, but to the extent that they are able to help, not just financially, but also um, with decision making, with the hard choices. We're even just saying, just keep going. Um, I think that helped a lot. So it takes a village to build a company, and I wouldn't wish solo entrepreneurship on anybody. Very hard.
Yes, yes. My first studio I did as a solo founder, and while I had a team I was working with, it was not the same. It wasn't the same structure as you have set up, where as we're a true founding team. So I would not wish it on anyone.
Yeah.
What do you feel like your biggest gap is where you wish you had more support as a founder?
Oh, that's a really good question. Um, hmm. I think Probably some sort of leadership coaching. I guess it goes back to the point where the founder sometimes is unchecked. And oftentimes is unchecked. And that can bring out the best into someone and bring in the worst in someone. But it's important in that case where there is really, I'm accountable to the team and to the investors, but not in the same way that if you work for a company that you're accountable to your manager or your manager's manager. And so creating a system in which I am accountable, and that could be the team, it could be the investors, and it could be someone that sits externally, whether it's an advisor or a coach or something, to say, hey, I want to be accountable for doing these things. That's really important, and that's a part I'm starting to build, uh, and that's what I would say.
So let's talk a little bit about the future, the unpredictable future. What do you see on the horizon for yourself and as a founder, and then also the company that you're like spending a lot of cycles thinking about?
So I think I think the first thing is to understand that for us, uh, what drives entertainment, and one of my hypotheses is that the best the best IPs are created through the combination of design, but also new technology that accesses a different design frontier. If you were to think about the games like Counter Strike, like World of Warcraft, like RuneScape, um, these games would not be possible without um, internet at the mass scale. And so it wasn't possible to build these games until call it 1999 to 2004, where internet penetration, at least for the US, became really, really high. And there was a moment in time, and of course, there was a consumer demand to be social, to build online communities, to participate in these things, to play PvP matches for shooters or for anything else. But that latent need cannot be met. And that's really important. And I think when a technology is when there is no fundamental change to technology or distribution, what you're building against is to say, okay, there is 100,000 really, really amazing companies and studio founders who are building design experiences, and I'm purely competing them on design. And I would imagine most of what can be filled in terms of a play pattern are already filled. Of course, there's always new things that pop up, right? League of Legends and Dota and the battle royale genre. So things, of course, there are new ways to play, but I think, am I going to be the one who finds that and to take advantage of it? Very, very difficult, especially as a small team. But when there is a fundamental shift in technology, in distribution, there is an opportunity space to say, okay, well, what else is possible to build that space? But the danger of it is some of those technologies may be dead ends, right? If you were to build a VR game in 2016, VR wasn't very widely accessible. So it is possible to build it, but the market is very small. In time will tell. With the current generation of generative intelligence, um, uh, what can be done? What needs will be set, and technology is evolving so quickly, and so we have to stay both in terms of the current on the trends, and I'm sure you guys are as well, in terms of what is possible, and how does that activate a type of play pattern or latent need that could not be satisfied before, or is this a false flag? And those are the things that we constantly think about and debate and build, because I think that's where really that intersection is where the opportunity is. That's what we want to go after.
Yep. No, that makes a lot of sense. So let me ask you an entirely unfair question. Given the experience so far, if you found yourself in a situation like ignore what happens to Proxima, this is some point in the future, indeterminate future. If you were faced with the choice of going and starting your own startup again, would you do it?
It's a tough question. It's I think it would depend on where I am in life and what the opportunity I see is. I love building companies, and it's building Proxima is one of the greatest joys in my life. And I think the journey is far, far from over. But it is also very, very tough. So I think I heard this interview with Jensen Huang, the founder of NVIDIA, and they asked if he would do it again, would you do it? And he's like, oh no, hell no, right? Because it's just, it's so hard. And I think that was the answer for a lot of founders. And these are founders that succeeded, right? We're still in the thick of it. I think there are certain points in which I think different priorities matter. Family matters, friendships matter, and all these things. And so I would have to evaluate. I think it's hard to say yes or no. But if Proxima was to be a non-going concern, I think I would take some time before ever thinking about it, rather than jump onto a revenge startup or something like that. But I think it's a moot question because I think there's a long way for us to go.
I think I love asking the unfair question just because it like pokes at the right now it's hard you can't forget how hard it is.
Yes.
Right. And I think, asking in that moment where exactly how hard it is, would you sign up to do it again, knowing both the highs and the lows, I think is an interesting reflection on how you found the journey so far. So
I also think life is short, right? And it's full of these amazing and magical moments that you would never experience if you don't step into it. And I got into distance running again after a number of years, and that's hard too, and it's painful, and very, very painful at certain distances. But it's also an experience, a very rewarding experience over time. And one day I would like to look up and say, hey, look, I literally ran the distance, right, and did all these things, and these are life experiences that I would never have otherwise. And sometimes I remind myself to, not take things so seriously, right? At the end of the day, it's just one life, right? We're not saving lives or anything. We're building fun things, and so go out and enjoy it, right? Whatever comes, but enjoy that moment. Yeah.
So I always like to close out the podcast with a bit of what I call an introspection lightning round. And where this really comes from is these are questions that I would ask potential co-founders when I would start doing co-founding dating. So I use this both with Ghostly Bear as well as Jam and Tea Studios. And it's just some quick questions that sort of reflect on like if we were going to build a business together, what would our strengths and weaknesses sort of line up as? And so I'll go through them very quickly. What is your superpower?
Oof. That's caught me off guard. I think I would say the ability to learn. I'm not the smartest person, not the fast person. When I was in middle school, my mom used to joke, "You were on the wrestling team, but you lost every match." Like I don't think I won a single match in wrestling.
No.
But the important thing is, I got up and I did it again. Is thinking, I'm going to try this technique next time. I'm going to try that technique next time, and it will work out one day. Same with my first job or second job, and same with EA, same with Proxima. Some people are just naturally gifted as founders. I think. I think I don't want to shortchange myself. I think I'm pretty good, but to get to great, it's about introspection and reflection and learning. I think I do that very well.
What are your biggest, outside of your superpower, what are your biggest strengths?
I think I can see people. And what I mean by that, I think so much of building a business is built on the relationships and the strength of the team. And so understanding what they're going through, sympathizing with them, empathizing with them, recognizing when there are problems. I think those are very important pieces of the puzzle. And I like to believe that that I'm resilient and, and I can take some hits and be able to get back up.
Yeah. I mean, having survived the 2022, 2023, I think you're pretty resilient. So there's unfortunately a bunch of startups that didn't make it through that squeeze.
For sure.
What are your big weaknesses?
Um, that's a good question as well. I think I can be stubborn. I think a lot of people who build businesses are stubborn. Um, and it's both the positive trait sometimes to say, I have the grit to keep going and I'm just keep doing it. But it's also a fault, which is sometimes stubbornness prevents you from seeing a broader view that contradicts your view. And one example is even before we pivoted, right, to say, hey, look, we have a worldview that is stubborn, that was calcified in some degree, and we changed before it was too late. But I wish it was sooner. And it's the same with being able to hear opinions that are contradictory to your own. I think that's something to learn from. Yeah.
What are your stress reactions?
Ooh. I um I think it's fight or flight. Um and I can't say it's always fight and it's not always flight. I think it really depends on what it is. I think what I learned is that it's really hard for the emotions not to go up and down in the moments. Um, and I do that too. But a night of sleep never killed anybody. The hard part is, I think, as a founder, is if you can fall asleep.
Yes.
But once you do, you look at it and you're like, you know what, the sky is not falling. And the last one I think is I really like. I'm not a stoic by any means, but I like a lot of the concept that stoicism presents. And one of them is just think about what is the worst case scenario. Right? In the worst scenario cases, I have an incredible family that I love. I have friends. I have founders I love to work with, and we accomplish some great things. And I still have my health, and that's the most important thing anyway. So what's the worst that can happen, right? In any situation. So just screw it and let's just go do it. Yeah.
And then the final one is, what are your upkeep needs? Like, what are the things that you need to sort of happen, especially within the business on a regular basis, to keep you more level headed?
What do you mean by that, Carlos? Can you give me an example?
Yeah, for sure. So I'll give you my example. I think folks on the pod have heard this a bunch of times. I need to find a way to rephrase this question. So an upkeep need that I have is when I do some body of work. So like make a spreadsheet, make a presentation, do a piece of design work, do a whatever. I need other people to, one, look at it, and then two, sort of acknowledge it and say like, hey, yeah, that was useful, or yeah, this is valuable work. Otherwise I like start to stress out and spin in anxiety because I'm like, okay, I just did something. Was it valuable or not? Like, and I think part of it for me is it stems to like, I try to ruthlessly prioritize my time in order to only do the most valuable things. Because to your point, we have linear time, right? And so if I'm not getting that feedback of, hey, you're making the right choices and this thing that you spent time on is valuable, then I'm just like, well, maybe I just wasted all this time and like, what am I behind on? And so I start to spin in anxiety, right? And so the team calls them my good boy points. And so when I post a spreadsheet or a forecast or whatever, they know that like, oh, hey, someone has to go and look at that and acknowledge that one, it exists and was valuable. Otherwise, Carl will start bugging everyone. So that's my upkeep need.
I see. I think for me, maybe it's not as external in terms of thinking about kind of the feedback from the team. What's important. I think for me, it's just to I need to logically see things through, right? It's sometimes it's a gut decision. Say, hey, we should do this or we should do that, but reason it out. Like the example of, okay, um, raising a bunch of money and that isn't the success that we observe in the market. Well, why is that? Right? What are the reasons in which they have more money than resources? Why doesn't it work? Um, what do these companies that have succeeded? What do they do? Uh, and what are the learnings from that? Right? Almost sometimes I write memos to myself, which is basically I like writing prose. I find that even though I was a consultant, which made decks all the time at one point in my life, I like writing in prose much better because I think it formulates my thoughts much more clear. And to think about, okay, I can come to terms with this particular path, even though it deviates from what I do. And when I do that, when I made that decision along the team, it feels like no matter how big that decision is, I've rationalized it. I need to do this because um, there is a big thing. Otherwise, what I get into is I would make a decision. I would say, hey, is this the right decision? Hey, look, I don't want to have a post decision regret, right? Hey, should I have done this otherwise? But if this is all the pieces I know, this is the way it reasons out. This is it. I can sleep at night, even that decision is very big.
Yeah. No, that makes a ton of sense. That's
Yeah.
awesome. Well, thank you for joining me on the podcast. I really appreciated the time and the stories and learning more about your journey. Here at the end of the podcast, I like to give you an opportunity of if there's any sort of shout outs or things you want to say to our audience here at the end, like the floor is yours.
Yeah, shout out to you for being a great host. Thanks for all the questions. It's really nice. Appreciate the space and the conversation.
Yeah, of course. And then finally, if anyone heard this interview and is like, wow, I really want to talk to Ran or follow up on something you said in the podcast, what's the best way for them to reach out to you?
Yeah, you can reach out to me on LinkedIn, I'm Rambo, or email me at I'm Ran, RAN, at Proxima.gg.
Well, thank you so much for joining me.
Okay, thanks so much for having me.
Thanks for listening to the entire episode. If you enjoyed it, please share it with your friends or anyone you think could benefit from it, and leave us a positive rating or subscribe. This episode was edited by Christopher Delano, music by Jake Hull, who's available for composer work in games. And if you're interested in learning more about the Game Founders support community, go to gamefounders.org or email me at carl@gamefounders.org. Thanks so much.